Fuck! I was supposed to be, okay, so many people have commented about this. I was supposed to be more conscientious of where my camera is, because I feel like I always put text or an image or something in the bottom left, and then I'm like, hey guys, look at this image in the bottom left, and I'm just covering it. Well, I didn't think about it when I made this presentation, so I'm sorry if I cover anything up with my face. I'll try my best. So the question we are going to talk about today is whether fish feel pain. And this is probably the most controversial thing I've talked about. Not that like the conclusions on it are exactly controversial, but people's opinions, if you want to call it that, are extremely controversial, because a lot of like fishing, commercial fishing, you know, how they kill fish on the boats for commercial fishing, and most importantly, recreational fishing, is done in what you would call inhumane ways, right? Putting a hook through the mouth of something that feels pain, yanking it out of the water so it's suffocating, you know, showing it off and all that, and then throwing it back in, is like, if you believe that fish feel pain, that's a very fucked up thing to do. I mean, like, imagine putting a hook through your dog's mouth or your cat's mouth and dragging it, you know, into the water or something like that. So it's like a very, very just distinctly negative thing that people don't like to think about. So it's not exactly that science is inconclusive or that like we don't know whether fish feel pain or that. It's just that there's a lot of people who deny it, because if they were to accept that fish do in fact feel pain, they would be accepting that recreational fishing is causing animal suffering. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to get over, especially a lot of people who are into fish, like to fish because they get to see them. So me personally, I don't fish. I don't hook and line fish. I've done net fishing before, like trawling and stuff like that, for like sampling. But I personally don't. But I also don't judge other people, because I think you have the right to do what you would like. But I think that in general, I think that it's a weird line, and a lot of the people who are denying fish pain in a non-scientific way are just doing it because they don't want to feel guilty. Anyways, this is a big thing in like news, and there's a lot of articles that go both ways. Mostly what you'll see is like studies that'll be like fish feel pain, or a study that's like fish do not feel pain, or this is my favorite title from the Smithsonian magazine, it's official, fish feel pain. It's not official. And what does that even mean? We haven't even really defined what pain means yet. But I think it's really funny, because if you Google it, you'll get a variety of like conflicting answers, because everyone and their mom has some opinion that's not really scientific based. And there's a lot of like ways you can look at and assess pain, because you can never really know for sure totally. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at it, and people tend to have really unproductive ways of looking at it and comparing it. So the first thing to talk about is what we mean by pain, because this is like very important, because I say pain a lot, but you have to think of the correct thing. So there's physical pain, which is the response to or awareness of damage to tissue or other body parts. And this is basically provably present in almost all living organisms, because you need to avoid damaging your tissues to survive. And it's totally unconscious, okay? Think of a person when they burn their hand on the stove, okay? Just the immediate reaction. You put your hand on the stove, it's too hot, your body pulls it away without you thinking. That is physical pain, okay? That's just that initial reaction, that jerk reaction. Almost all organisms have this. If you stab a fish, it's gonna fucking move out of the way, because the fish doesn't want to be stabbed. It doesn't want damage to its tissues. This is not what we mean by pain. This is just nerve response. This is just awareness of tissue damage. When we talk about pain, what we mean is emotional pain. This is suffering. It's stress response, it's avoidance behaviors, and it's lethargy and in resuming normal behaviors. Basically, suffering, the thing that people debate about, right? No one's debating, no one reasonable at least, is debating that fish don't feel physical pain. That doesn't make any sense. But emotional pain and the concept of suffering is the important thing, right? So when you burn your hand on the stove, you don't just pull your hand away and then nothing happens, okay? You might pull your hand away and nothing happens immediately, okay? And that's the physical pain response. That's your body's natural reflex response. But then your hand starts fucking hurting. And your hand burns, and it might last like that for a while, and you might have to fix everything, and you're gonna be like in pain and suffering from it. Even if it's not severe, it's still suffering. Suffering is like an overused word to where we make it seem like it's just like, extreme pain. Suffering just means like a lasting pain, a lasting emotional effect, right? So in response to that initial nerve pull away, the physical pain, humans, you will have an emotional pain. If I punch this like cement wall as hard as I can right now, my hand's gonna pull away and be like, fuck, and that's the physical pain. And then I'm gonna be like, fuck, my hand hurts, and it's gonna hurt for a while. And that's the emotional pain. And that's what we debate, is whether fish feel or not, because that is what constitutes suffering, because physical pain isn't really a big deal. If you don't feel emotional pain, and so like you can just be stabbed and you'll be like, oh man, I don't want to get stabbed, let me get out of here, but you're not actually suffering, then there's not much of like a moral responsibility. And that's what a lot of fishermen want to believe, especially recreational fishermen want to believe, is that they only experience physical pain. So it's like, yeah, they have a hook in their mouth, they don't want a hook in their mouth, but they're not suffering. Okay, so let's look at the evidence. First thing to note is, can we 100% know? I want to make this very clear. You cannot 100% know the experience of other organisms. If you are not that organism, you cannot know it. But we can use pretty clear comparisons to ourselves and then other vocal animals. So like dogs and cats, things that make noises when they're suffering, we can know, right? Like we might not be able to like live their experience, or we might not be able to exactly tell them, or have them tell us, but they're vocalizing animals. They can, make a very clear sound, an explanation when they're in pain. Fish are not so capable of that. So we have to sort of compare them to the vocal animals, to ourselves, to dogs, to cats, and we can come to a pretty strong conclusion when we look at that. Okay, so the first thing is how to not compare pain, because this is how for a long time people compared pain, and this is why there's a myth, a long existing myth, that fish don't feel pain, and this is why so many people are willing to stick to that, because people compared pain solely by looking at structures and assuming the structures have to be the same for things to function the same, which is not true. You do not need the brain of a human to have an experience that a human has, okay? And then there's this thing, which I will uncover up now, called analogous structures. And analogous structures basically means things that evolved somewhere along that are not related to each other but serve the same purpose, like wings in butterflies, wings in birds, okay? They didn't evolve from the same thing. Butterflies and birds are not closely related, but they serve the same purpose, okay? So a fish brain and a human brain can have differing structures that both serve to cause emotional suffering, emotional pain. So you can't just look at the structure and be like, yep, nope, they don't have the center where we feel pain. So therefore, like, we've identified the center of a human brain as the part that feels pain, and since they don't have that, that must mean that they don't. That's a stupid way to go about it, and that's the way that it was gone about for centuries, and that's why this whole myth exists. Okay? How we actually compare pain, the correct way. Response, function, not structure. Structure is a terrible way to compare because you have analogous structures. So this is a quote: "Fish produce the same opiates, the body's innate painkillers, that mammals do." So they're producing painkillers, which would be a weird thing to do if you're not feeling pain, long-lasting pain. If you're just having nerve response, why would your body produce painkillers? Their brain activity is analogous to that of terrestrial vertebrates. Sticking a pin into a goldfish or rainbow trout just behind their gills stimulates nociceptors, which are what we consider the pain receptors in fish, and a cascade of electrical activity that surges toward brain regions essential for conscious sensory perceptions, okay? So not just the hindbrain and brainstem, which is where nerves things happen. So if you were just having like a pull away response, like if a fish was just having a pull away response, you would expect the signals to only go to the hindbrain and the brainstem, because that's where reflexes and impulses come from. But when fish feel pain, signals actually also go to the areas that have conscious thinking sensory perceptions, those parts of the fish brain. So why would the fish's body need painkillers? And why would the fish's body need a conscious awareness rather than just a reflex? Okay? Those are things that point pretty heavily towards the existence of suffering. So we're going to look at some experiments. I didn't write anything down about these. I just put 2 pictures. So if I forget for a second, I might have to think a second. The first one is Lego block and acetic acid. This one I think is the weakest of the experiments, but I think it's interesting. Basically, fish show very avoidant behaviors when it comes to foreign objects, most fish at least. So if you have a tank full of rainbow trout as they did in this experiment, and you put in something large and brightly colored, like a big brightly colored Lego brick, the fish are going to avoid it. They're just going to like not approach it, watch it from a distance, not go to that section of the tank, okay? Because that's just how fish are. They're very cautious with foreign objects, okay? However, when you inject the rainbow trout in this experiment with acetic acid, and acetic acid basically simulates nerve damage. So acetic acid kind of like, imagine it like spice on your tongue, right? Like when you eat something spicy, it's like a pain. It's not actually nerve damage, but it like simulates that pain. And that's, humans like a little bit of that, and that's what we do with that. Acetic acid, basically if you inject it into the fish, it's simulating nerve damage. Like their body is feeling nerve damage, right? Like we feel spice on the tongue. So their body reacts in the normal way that they would if they were injuring. So basically it's a way to make the fish's body think that they're injured without actually being injured. And if you inject fish with acetic acid, they no longer avoid the foreign object. And the conclusion from this is that they're too distracted by the suffering to care about the foreign object in the tank. Basically, if it was just a nerve response, then there would be no reason for their behavior to change. But their behavior does change. They no longer avoid the giant brightly colored Lego brick in the tank once they have that, tissue damage. Another one is the acetic acid versus benign saline. This is resuming normal activity. So if you remember when I talked about emotional suffering, one of the things I said is lethargy with getting back to normal behaviors. So basically, fish are injected, like a control group and experiment group are injected, one with acetic acid, the simulate nerve damage, and one with benign saline, which does absolutely nothing. They injected both just so that there's no difference. The other fish, even the ones being injected with saline, are still going through that stressful experience of being injected. They have to be held for a second, they have to be injected. So they're still going through that negative experience, but they're not actually having any tissue damage. And it took the fish that were injected with acetic acid twice as long to resume normal feeding as it did the ones with benign saline, which basically means that it just doesn't make sense if it's only a nerve response. If it's only a quick nerve response, like, oh, tissue damage, move out of the way, be done with it, why would it take you longer to resume normal activity? Why would your stress response be changed? Why would your behavior change? And then I think potentially the strongest one is Painkillers and Zebrafish. And now that I put this image on screen, I was just putting together images. I realized how funny this looks. Basically, we drugged zebrafish. So if you have two tanks, as they did in this experiment, and you have an empty tank and a tank that is filled with plants and decorations and logs and gravel and places to hide, fish will almost always choose the planted tank given a choice. So basically the fish in this experiment are given a choice between two tanks. They can choose the completely barren, empty tank, just water and nothing else in it, or they can choose the tank that's well planted. And if any of you guys have fish, they like plants, they like, logs, they like things to hide in, okay? So given the choice, without any other outside factors, the zebrafish will always go for, almost always I should say, there are divergents, will almost always go for the planted tank. However, if you inject the fish with acetic acid, okay, basically simulate that nerve damage, and then put in the barren tank painkillers, okay? So basically the barren tank is filled with an anesthetic, okay, that numbs pain. The fish will choose the empty tank. Will begin choosing the empty tank. So basically the idea is when the fish have no nerve damage being simulated, no tissue damage being simulated, they'll always choose the more appealing tank. However, the empty tank becomes more appealing if the fish is suffering and if it has painkillers. Why would a fish be attracted to painkillers? Who knows? There's other explanations for this. Maybe there's something else about the anesthetic that is appealing to the fish. It doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to numb the pain. However, it does seem to be a pretty strong tendency, and when you combine it with the other studies, So the conclusion of this all is that most, not all, there are still some naysayers, but most of the scientific community at this point in time agrees that fish very likely, experience emotional suffering. So what do we do now? because fish are the most mistreated vertebrates by far, because they've always been viewed as simple and stupid. So how we harvested them, how we treated them in aquariums has never actually been thought about. You know, we shock fish to and other kinds of, you know, nasty things to catch them for the aquarium trade. Most fish caught in commercial fishing are just thrown onto the boat from the nets and then just left there to suffocate. Because this is just, we viewed them as simple and stupid, and this is not something that we've ever taken the time to care about. However, now that, you know, more research is coming out, you know, things are changing. In first world aquaculture facilities, we're actually starting to use humane methods, right? So the place that I work at right now, that I worked with, basically was building aquaculture systems in churches and food banks and things like that to provide more food. Aquaponic systems, I should say. And when it came to killing the fish, we use strong electric currents, because that is a humane way. It knocks them out completely, basically renders them unconscious with no active feeling, and then you can kill them from there, and you don't have to worry about pain or writhing or anything like that, or missing, you know. So there's still lots of progress to be made, but there are places, particularly nonprofits and government agencies, government aquaculture systems, that are working towards having a more morally ethical environment for killing fish. So hopefully we see that continue. Just another reason to hate commercial fishing, though. Fuck commercial fishing. So bad for the environment, so bad for fish populations, so poorly regulated, and now you can add fish suffering onto it. Don't eat wild fish, eat farmed fish.